Pani kwa chile, te legislative runni china bage. Jang sudan ki, desli to te san pandi china ge.
They said he wasn't human. Not because he didn't bleed, but because he never hesitated. In the underworld, hesitation gets you killed. Emotion gets you buried. And attachment? Attachment destroys empires. Yet he ruled one. For 15 years, the city belonged to him. Every port, every backroom deal, every politician with a secret they prayed would never surface. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. His silence was more terrifying than another man's rage. They called him the Silent King. No interviews. No public displays. No visible family. No lovers. No friends. One rule stood above all others, a rule he enforced with ruthless consistency. Never show weakness. Never create leverage. Because the moment someone knows what you care about, they own you. And he cared about nothing. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. The annual gathering of crime families was never about celebration. It was a ritual. A demonstration of power disguised as tradition. Velvet suits, polished shoes, crystal glasses filled with expensive lies. Every boss in the region was there. And when he entered the room, conversations didn't stop. They faded. Men twice his size lowered their eyes. Rivals who secretly plotted against him forced respectful nods. Even the air felt heavier when he walked past. He didn't smile. He didn't greet anyone. He simply took his seat at the head of the long black table. Control wasn't something he demanded. It followed him. The meeting moved like clockwork, territory updates, shipment routes, coded discussions about weapons and money laundering. He spoke only when necessary. Short sentences. Final decisions. No debates. Until she entered. She wasn't supposed to be important. Just a presence in the background. A quiet figure assisting with documents. Someone invisible. But he noticed her. And that was the first mistake. For a split second, so brief most would miss it, his eyes softened. It was subtle. Almost imperceptible. But in a room full of predators trained to read weakness? It was loud. She approached the table to hand him a folder. Her hands trembled slightly. Maybe from fear. Maybe from something else. Their fingers brushed. And instead of pulling away like he always did, he held on. The room didn't gasp. The room froze. Because the Silent King did something no one had seen in 15 years. He stood, reached for her, and kissed her. Not violently. Not recklessly. But deliberately. A slow, unmistakable declaration. The kind that rewrites power structures. The kind that creates leverage. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the whispers began. To outsiders, it might have looked romantic. But in that world, it was an earthquake. Every rival boss at that table saw the same thing. A weakness. A vulnerability. A target. The Silent King, the man who executed his own cousin for dating without permission, the man who once burned an entire warehouse because a soldier mentioned his mother's name in public, had just broken his own sacred rule. Publicly. Intentionally. But that question spread through the underworld before the night even ended. Was he in love? Was he losing control? Or was this some deeper strategy no one understood yet? Because powerful men don't make careless moves. And he was never careless. Later that night, in his private office overlooking the city he owned, he stood alone in the dark. No guards inside. No advisors. Just silence. The city lights flickered below like fragile stars. Behind him, the door opened softly. It was her. She looked different now. No trembling. No fear. Was that necessary? She asked quietly. He didn't turn around. They were watching, he replied. They're always watching. A long pause. You've just painted a target on my back. Another pause. Then finally he turned. And for the first time, we see something dangerous in his eyes. Not love. Not weakness. Calculation. They needed to see it, he said calmly. See what? She whispered. He stepped closer. That I can break my own rules. The words hung in the air like smoke. Because in the criminal world, unpredictability is more terrifying than cruelty. If a man never bends, you learn his limits. But if he bends without warning, you don't know where the breaking point is. And that makes him unstoppable. Or unstable. Outside, across the city, phones were already ringing. A rival lieutenant replayed the moment in his mind. A trusted captain questioned whether the king was slipping. And somewhere in the shadows, someone smiled. Because when empires crack, ambition rises. Back in the office, she looked at him carefully. You knew they would think it was weakness. Yes. And you're okay with that? He adjusted his cufflinks slowly. They're about to show me who the traitors are. Her expression changed. This wasn't affection. It was bait. The kiss. The vulnerability. The broken rule. All of it. The trap. But traps are dangerous. Because sometimes, the hunter underestimates the desperation of the prey. As the camera pulls back from the towering building, the city feels different now. Tenser. Restless. Because for the first time in 15 years, the Silent King has done the unthinkable. He showed the world something to lose. And in the Underworld, that's an invitation to war. But the real question isn't whether his empire will crack. It's this. Did he just make the smartest move of his life? Or the only mistake that could destroy him? And somewhere in the darkness, someone is already preparing to test him. Power doesn't collapse loudly. It fractures in whispers. By morning, the city looked the same. Traffic choking the streets, businessmen sipping coffee, sirens crying in the distance. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The kiss had already become a story. Not a rumor. A signal. In backroom bars and encrypted phone calls, the Underworld replayed it again and again, each time rewriting its meaning. The Silent King showed weakness. No, he's setting a trap. Or maybe he's finally human. And that uncertainty was more dangerous than any gun. Inside his fortress, the throne room felt colder than usual. His inner circle stood in a half-circle before him, men who had killed on his command without question. Men who had survived wars because they trusted his instincts more than their own. But today, none of them spoke. The king sat still, fingers interlaced, eyes unreadable. Finally, his enforcer broke the silence. Shipments from the East Dock were delayed last night, he said. No attack. No arrests. Just interference. The king didn't react. The consigliere spoke next, voice measured. That dock hasn't been touched in 7 years. Someone tested us. Still no reaction. The silence stretched. Then the king looked up. Who benefits? He asked calmly. No one answered. Because the answer was uncomfortable. Everyone. Across the city, rivals smelled blood. A mid-level lieutenant from a rival syndicate leaned back in his chair, replaying a security clip on his tablet, grainy footage, but clear enough. The kiss. The pause. The stillness of the room. He smiled. Even kings bleed, he muttered. He sent one message. Just 4 words. Test the borders tonight. Back at the fortress, she watched the cracks form. From the shadows, she observed the guards' body language. Tighter grips on weapons, longer stares, hesitation where there used to be certainty. Fear wasn't new. But doubt was. She found the king later, alone in his private study, staring at old surveillance photos pinned to a board. Photos from years ago. Faces crossed out. Traitors. Dead men. You knew this would happen, she said quietly. He didn't deny it. They're circling, she continued. They think you're exposed. He finally turned to her. And you think they're right? She hesitated. And hesitation is always an answer. That night, the first Real crack appeared. A trusted courier never arrived. No body. No message. Just silence. The kind that makes men paranoid. Within hours, word spread. One of the king's secondary routes had been compromised. Not seized. Not destroyed. Just known. Someone had talked. Or someone had always been listening. The consigliere brought him the report with hands that were steady, too steady. This information was internal, he said. Only 5 people had access. The king studied his face. 5 people. 4 stood loyal. 1 stood missing. Or worse. Lock down communications, the king ordered. No calls. No meetings. No movements without my approval. The order should have restored confidence. Instead, it amplified fear. Because lockdowns mean one thing in the underworld. A purge is coming. Across town, a deal went wrong. Two soldiers loyal to the king walked into what should have been a routine exchange. They didn't walk out. The message was clear. Someone was bold enough now to touch his men. That had never happened before. Not openly. Not without permission. The throne wasn't just cracking. It was being tested. Late that night, the king received a message. No sender. No trace. Just a sentence. You broke the rule. Now we break you. He stared at the screen for a long time. Then slowly he smiled. Because this was what he had been waiting for. But somewhere else in the city, someone else was watching too. Someone closer than any rival. Someone who knew exactly why that rule existed in the first place. In a quiet room, she opened a locked drawer and removed an old photograph. Younger. Standing beside someone whose face had been burned away. A past the underworld never learned about. A weakness that once cost him everything. Her hands shook. Not from fear. From guilt. Because the crack in the throne hadn't started with the kiss. It had started long before. And now it was too big to stop. Back in his fortress, the king stood before the city skyline once again. His empire was still standing. But it no longer felt unshakable. Behind him, a guard hesitated before speaking. Sir, if some of the captains are asking questions. The king didn't turn. Good, he said softly. Questions lead to answers. And answers, he continued, finally turning around, lead to graves. The guard swallowed. Because for the first time, loyalty felt dangerous. As the camera pulls away, the city pulses with tension. Deals are being planned. Betrayals are being whispered. And the throne, once carved from fear and certainty, now shows its first visible crack. The war hasn't begun yet. But everyone feels it coming. Because when power wavers, someone always reaches for the crown. Empires don't fall from the top. They rot from underneath. The body was found at dawn. No warning. No negotiation. No public spectacle. Just a message carved into silence. He was one of the king's oldest captains, loyal for 12 years. A man who had taken bullets, buried enemies, and never once questioned an order. Now he lay on cold concrete inside an abandoned warehouse. Execution style. Precise. Professional. And staged. When the photos reached the silent king, the room went still. Not because a captain was dead, but because of how he was killed. The method was unmistakable. It was the king's signature. A technique only his inner circle knew. Which meant one of two things. Either the king ordered it, or someone wanted the world to believe he did. Within hours, paranoia spread like infection. Soldiers stopped trusting their commanders. Commanders stopped trusting each other. Every conversation felt monitored. Every silence felt loaded. In the underground, whispers sharpened. The king is purging his own. He's losing control. No, someone's framing him. But perception is power. And perception was turning against him. In the war room, tension thickened the air. The consigliere placed the file on the table. No communication from him in the last 24 hours, he said carefully. But this was surgical. The enforcer's jaw tightened. Only 5 of us know that method. The king looked at each of them in silence. One by one. Measuring breathing patterns. Eye movement. Micro-hesitations. Psychological warfare wasn't new to him. But this was intimate. Someone wasn't attacking his empire. They were attacking his authority. And that is far more dangerous. Then came the second blow. A federal task force raided one of his offshore warehouses. Not a random sweep. A precise strike. They bypassed empty containers. Ignored decoys. Went straight to hidden inventory. Information that only existed inside encrypted channels. The empire's foundation wasn't cracking anymore. It was bleeding. That night, one of his lieutenants made a mistake. He asked the question no one else dared to. Did you order it? Silence. The entire room froze. The king slowly turned toward him. Cold. Controlled. You think I would need permission to remove a traitor? The lieutenant swallowed. That's not what I meant. But fear had already exposed him. The king stepped closer. Doubt spreads faster than bullets, he said quietly. Be careful you're not the one spreading it. The lieutenant lowered his gaze. But doubt had already taken root. And once planted, it grows. Across town, a rival boss made his move. Not openly. Subtly. He offered protection to two smaller crews loyal to the king. Just in case things became unstable. It was a chess move. Not a punch. And the silent king understood something chilling. This wasn't chaos. It was coordinated. Someone was pulling threads from multiple directions. The captain's execution. The federal raid. The border tests. All too synchronized. This wasn't emotion. It was strategy. Back in his private quarters, she confronted him. They're turning on you, she said. He didn't respond. You said this was bait. You said they'd reveal themselves. They are, he answered calmly. Not fast enough, she snapped. For the first time, tension flared between them. You underestimated how desperate they are. His eyes darkened. I never underestimate desperation. She stepped closer. Then what are you missing? The question lingered. Because there was something off. This felt personal. Not just political. The dead captain wasn't random. He had been close to the king years ago. Before the rule. Before the silence. Before the emotional exile. A memory resurfaced, something buried. Something connected to the reason the rule existed in the first place. And suddenly, the king realized something terrifying. This wasn't about present weakness. It was about past scars. Midnight. Gunfire erupted at one of his downtown clubs. Not a massacre. Not an all-out attack. Just enough violence to make headlines. Just enough to shake investors. Just enough to make soldiers question stability. It was psychological erosion. And it was working. Even his most loyal enforcer approached him with quiet concern. They're not afraid like they used to be, the enforcer admitted. The king nodded slowly. Good. The enforcer frowned. Good. Fear makes men predictable, the king said. Confidence makes them careless. But even as he spoke, a small crack formed inside him. Because this time, unpredictability wasn't entirely his. Someone else was adapting. Matching him. Anticipating him. That had never happened before. Then came the final blow of the night. A message delivered by hand. No digital trail. Inside, a single photograph. It showed the dead captain. Alive. Meeting with someone. Not a rival boss. Not law enforcement. But someone from inside the king's own structure. The face was partially hidden. But recognizable enough. The king's expression didn't change. But the temperature in the room dropped. Because betrayal is survivable. Conspiracy is manageable. But infiltration? Infiltration destroys empires from the inside out. He looked up slowly. Seal the exits, he ordered. The enforcer hesitated. Now. Yes. His voice was calm. Too calm. Because if someone inside his walls was orchestrating this, then blood wasn't just in the foundations. It was in the throne room. As alarms quietly activated across the compound, men scrambled without understanding why. And somewhere in the shadows, someone smiled. Because the silent king had finally done what no one thought possible. He had turned inward. Suspicion now lived inside his own empire. And once a ruler doubts his kingdom, the kingdom starts preparing for a new ruler. The war is no longer outside. It's within. Betrayal doesn't begin with hatred. It begins with planning. By the time the silent king sealed his compound, the damage was already done. Men who once swore loyalty now avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when footsteps echoed down hallways. Every glance felt like surveillance. Every silence felt like accusation. But the king wasn't reacting. He was calculating. Because the moment paranoia spreads, truth surfaces. In the war room, the consigliere laid out financial records across the table, months of transactions, subtle diversions, rerouted funds hidden behind legitimate fronts. It started long before the kiss, he said quietly. The king studied the dates. 8 months ago. Small amounts at first. Almost invisible. Then larger. More confident. This wasn't revenge. It was architecture. Someone had been building a parallel structure beneath his empire, brick by brick, unnoticed. The captain who died, the enforcer muttered. He had access to these routes. Yes, the king replied. And now he's dead. The room understood the implication. The execution wasn't random. It was cleanup. Across the city, in a dim penthouse lit only by skyline reflections, 2 shadowed figures sat across from each other. No sudden moves, one of them said calmly. The king thrives on chaos. We give him patterns. And if he suspects? He already does. A faint smile. That's the point. This wasn't rebellion. It was choreography. Every raid, every interception, every public challenge, timed to erode confidence without triggering full war. Because open war unites empires. Doubt fractures them. Back inside the compound, she stood alone in the king's private study. The old photograph lay on the desk again, the burned face beside his younger self. She ran her fingers over it. Years ago, before he became the silent king, he had trusted someone completely. And that trust had cost him everything. An ambush. A massacre. A betrayal born from love. That was the day he created the rule. No attachments. No leverage. No weakness. But this time, the blueprint felt familiar. Too familiar. As if someone knew the psychology behind the rule. As if someone understood the trauma that built it. Which meant the architect wasn't guessing. They were personal. Tell me something, she said later, stepping into the war room. The king looked up. What if this isn't about power? The enforcer scoffed. It's always about power. She shook her head. No. What if it's about making him break again? Silence. Because breaking him emotionally would do more damage than bullets ever could. The king's gaze hardened. They're trying to make me react, he said calmly. And you won't? She asked. He paused. Then, not yet. Another report arrived. 2 mid-level crews had quietly shifted allegiance. Not openly, but financially. They were hedging, preparing for transition. That was the most dangerous sign of all. Because when soldiers prepare for a new king, it means they believe the old one is already dying. The enforcer stepped closer. Give the order, he said. We crush them. Publicly. The king considered it. A show of force would restore fear. But fear wasn't the missing piece anymore. Trust was. And trust can't be forced. It must be rebuilt or weaponized. Later that night, the king summoned only 3 people. The consigliere, the enforcer, and her. He placed the financial records on the table. This isn't sabotage, he said quietly. It's succession planning. The words landed heavily. Someone wasn't trying to destroy his empire. They were trying to inherit it. Cleanly. Strategically. By the time he fell, the infrastructure would already belong to someone else. And the kiss? The consigliere asked. The king's eyes flickered briefly toward her. They accelerated their timeline after that. Because the moment he appeared vulnerable, the architect moved faster. As if waiting for confirmation. As if watching for that exact signal. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a secret meeting unfolded. A trusted figure within the king's structure sat across from a rival financier. No threats. No weapons. Just contracts. The rival slid a folder across the table. Once he isolates himself, the rival said calmly, the soldiers will choose stability. We provide that. And if he fights? The insider asked. He won't see it coming. A dangerous assumption. Because underestimating the silent king had buried many before. But this time, the betrayal was layered. Psychological. Patient. Back in the compound, alarms suddenly flickered, not from attack, but from internal system overrides. Access codes changed. Security cameras looped. Someone inside had activated a failsafe protocol. The enforcer drew his weapon instantly. It's happening, he said. But the king didn't move. Instead, he closed his eyes for a brief second. And smiled. Because now the blueprint was visible. The financial diversion. The staged execution. the federal tip-offs, the shifting allegiances, all synchronized, all leading to this moment, forcing him into isolation so the empire could quietly transfer. But they made one mistake. They assumed he was reacting emotionally. They assumed the kiss was weakness. They assumed the trauma still controlled him. They forgot something critical. He learned from betrayal once before. And men who survive betrayal don't just harden. They adapt. As armed guards rushed through corridors, uncertainty filled the compound. Some loyal, some not. The throne room doors slowly locked from the inside. And the silent king finally spoke. "Seal the city." The enforcer hesitated. "That's war." "No," the king replied softly. "It's selection. Because when the blueprint is revealed, you don't panic. You let the architects step into the light." And somewhere, in the shadows of the city skyline, the mastermind of this betrayal watched events unfold, confident, precise, certain the throne was already within reach. But what they didn't know was that the silent king had just decided to stop defending his empire and start hunting inside it. The final move was coming, and only one side understood the full board.
Z moved deliberately across faces. Weakness is believing you understand the rule. A ripple of tension. He stepped forward. For 8 months, someone has been building beneath my empire. No denial. Silence is confession. You redirected funds. You staged fear. You manipulated perception. A captain shifted uncomfortably. The king's eyes locked onto him for half a second, then moved on. I allowed it. The words detonated quietly. Murmurs spread. Because if true, everything changed. I needed to know who would lean when the wind shifted. He turned slightly. And who would stand? Suddenly, the back doors slammed shut. Armed figures appeared along the balconies above. Not random guards. Hand-picked loyalists. The enforcer stepped into view from the shadows. The circle was complete. The architect felt it then. The tightening. The realization. This wasn't a trap for the king. It was a harvest. But harvests spill blood. And blood doesn't always land where expected. The king raised his hand slightly. No one leaves until I know who designed this. A dangerous gamble. Because desperate men do desperate things. And when empires bleed, they drown everyone nearby. A single gunshot echoed. No one saw who fired first. Chaos erupted. Screams. Movement. Shadows colliding. The opera house transformed into a battlefield. Smoke filled the air. Loyalty tested in real time. And in the center of it all, the silent king stood unmoving. Watching. Calculating. Selecting. Across the room, through the haze, his eyes locked onto one figure trying to escape through a side corridor. Recognition flashed. Not surprise. Confirmation. He moved. Not rushed. Not frantic. Purposeful. As the screen fades to black, we don't see who falls. We don't see who survives. We only hear his final words in the darkness. You wanted the throne. A pause. Now prove you can survive it. And somewhere in the silence that follows, an empire decides who its true king is.